Hello, and welcome to Workplace Stories, the podcast where human capital experts share their real-world experiences and insights. Hosted by Red Thread Research, Workplace Stories surfaces the latest industry trends, innovative talent strategies, and best practices for success. Tune in for practical advice on how to best transform your workplace.
Welcome to Workplace Stories. I'm Stacia Gar.
And I'm Dani Johnson.
We just finished a conversation with Cole Napper, who is the author of a new book called People Analytics, Using Data-Driven HR and Gen AI as a Business Asset. This was our second conversation with Cole, but I would say that he brought a lot of punchiness to today's discussion. Dani, what did you take away?
Yeah, I loved his measured optimism. Cole's book is about people analytics, but we engaged in everything from, people analytics to the future of the HR department to what's going to happen with AI and how it's going to be the downfall of humankind. So I loved his optimism in providing data and helping us understand it on sort of a better level. He's got some really interesting data that he shares with us here. And I also really loved his willingness to engage. We went off script almost with every single question. He rolled with punches. He was really, really fun to have on this podcast.
Yeah, I agree. When we were prepping for our summary here, we're like, we didn't actually discuss all of our prepped questions very much. But I think that speaks to kind of the dynamic nature, both of Cole, but also of what's happening more broadly. There are a couple of things that really stood out for me. One was, if I had to kind of summarize the whole book, as it were, it's really about how we should be building a new paradigm, a new business paradigm, a new HR paradigm, and certainly a new people analytics paradigm with the impact of Gen AI and data and all the rest of that. So that was kind of my big high-level takeaway. We talked a bit about data architecture and how data architecture is now like this thing that is so critical to enabling all of everybody's AI dreams, and how organizations that maybe don't focus there may be the ones who don't make it, which I thought was a strong opinion, but I don't know that I disagree. So I appreciated that. And then the other thing we talked about is a hot button topic, or there were actually many, but the one I'm thinking about is the Ulrich model. Cole believes that it won't see through the next decade. And by the Ulrich model, we mean the COE, HR Service Center, and HRBP model. I actually tend to agree with him. We've been doing this HR framework research, and this question of how that model works and where it falls down, particularly as you start to remove HR service delivery from humans and make it more automatable via Gen AI, really pushes you to ask some hard questions about the ways that HR is organized right now. And it was good to hear Cole's perspective on that particular point.
Totally agree. He also pointed out that Dave Ulrich would probably agree with him just because of some of the things that he's been writing lately, and just the nature of HR is changing drastically, which we heard quite a bit in our summit as well.
Yeah. Wonderful. We hope you all enjoyed the podcast and look forward to hearing your comments on our platform. Cole, welcome back to Workplace Stories. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you, guys. I'm very honored to be back.
We don't have many repeat guests, so I'm glad that you're honored.
You got us back. That's kind of a big deal.
I was actually going to ask you, I was like, do you guys even do that? Like, is this special or is this just normal?
No, it's pretty special. We've had a couple of repeats, but nobody on a regular basis. And never anybody that we don't like. So we invite you back if, one, you're easily editable, or two, we like you.
Hey, well, I'm one of those two things. We'll just let the audience decide which one.
Fun fact, though, when I went to go and review what we had talked about last time, do you know what day the last one published? Exactly a year ago today.
No way.
Oh, weird.
No way. No, November 6th, 2024 was when we published the last one. So I guess November is your time, Cole.
Yeah, this is my season of the year.
Yeah.
Also, we encourage you to listen to that one. Cole was in a different role at the time. He was doing people analytics for a very large organization. So you can hear his take on how that went.
Yep. But since then, you have written a book. I feel like we've been talking about this book in one form or another for a long time. So tell us what made you write this book right now.
Yeah, I was. So the book is People Analytics using data-driven HR and generative AI as a business asset. And the reason I wrote it, and it's actually kind of interesting because when we spoke last time is when I was writing it, but I wasn't talking about it publicly. And so a lot of those things that I probably was thinking about at the time, I was maybe even using you guys as like a test audience. Like, is this idea going to get traction or not? I don't know. We'll find out. But the reason why I wrote it is because I feel like we're in a phase shift of what's happening in HR more generally, but in people analytics, definitely very specifically. If you've read the book, you've seen that people analytics hit a high watermark in 2022 of the number of people in the profession and has actually shrunk since then. And we've gone through what some might call somewhat of an identity crisis. And so what I wanted to do is write a book about, instead of, I'd been kind of giving these talks at conferences about, your people analytics is doing this wrong, this wrong, and this wrong. And I realized like that was not resonating with anyone. And so instead of chiding the field, I said, you know what I should do is write a book about what we should do differently and how to get there. Because I think the biggest thing that was holding the field back was fear of change, fearing of not knowing. And then especially with the introduction of generative AI, fear of a new technology and just equipping people with the skills and the data that was necessary to help make that transition, I thought was going to be a much more productive way of going about doing it.
I think it's interesting that you say that because you also wrote this book not for people analytics people. You wrote it for a broader audience. Tell us why that broader audience should listen to you.
I think I said this last time I was on there. I don't know if they should. I mean, I think you guys invited me back for a reason. I think I'm listened to-able, I guess, is one reason they should. The reality is I've practiced in a lot of different organizations. I mean, I mean this as a conservative estimate. I've probably spoken to over 1,000 people who do people analytics in the last 5 years. And so I have a pretty good survey of what is going on in the community. What are the challenges that people are facing? And a lot of the things that people analytics is facing are within the four walls of the function. But much of it is about where does it fit into the larger ecosystem of HR and where does HR fit into the larger ecosystem of the business? And many of the challenges it faces is because people analytics has failed to adapt itself to the HR ecosystem and the business ecosystem. And so you have to address it from a root cause perspective of like, where the problems are residing and how do we fix that systemically so that the HR function can benefit, people analytics can benefit, and the organizations in which they reside benefit as well.
Yeah. I wanted to just call out your comment about the 2022 being the high watermark of folks in the profession. Is that data that you collected? Where did that come from?
So that was Lightcast data. I had originally written an article with Revelio Labs, published in my newsletter. And then when I got to Lightcast, I replicated that data and put it in the book. There's probably about a 10,000 person difference in the two. So different sources get different data. But the funny thing is the trend is almost identical. And so I've pulled it from two different sources to show where the data comes from.
Okay. The reason I ask is because when I think back to our people analytics tech market study, which we published a version of that back in April, and we were looking at the year-over-year growth rate of the people analytics tech market, it mirrors that as well. So we hit a high growth year-over-year growth rate in 2022, and it's almost like fallen off a cliff since then, going from like a 53% year-over-year growth rate to 28% last year. So it's not just the people, it's the tech too, which is interesting.
One of the things I actually did is I built a tracker for people analytics, workforce planning, and talent intelligence that updates, once a day. So I actually have the numbers every day, kind of like an ongoing tracker for myself. It's very interesting.
So why do you think it is? I'm really curious, both of you.
I mean, I love the red thread perspective first.
Oh, come on. Why do I think it is? I think that during the pandemic and immediately following, there was a real push to get people data because we couldn't see people. And so people looked to people data as being the next best thing. And we saw some organizations that were really able to take advantage of that because they maybe already had the people infrastructure or they had the basic data quality so that they could take it, put it into some tech and get some meaningful results. A whole bunch of other organizations, maybe as many as half, I agree with Cole, there's a real division in terms of like you're either on this side of the line or that side of the line. There's not a lot of room in between. That other half, they had been doing some sort of very basic reporting, and they just didn't have the data quality or structure. But they still implemented the tech, and then it didn't work. And so I think what happened was we had both tech that didn't deliver the value, and therefore the people were seen as not delivering the value. And it's gone down. We saw significant reductions in force in the people analytics space in 2023 in particular. But at the same time, for those for whom they had everything together and they actually were impacting business results, we saw those teams grow. So it was really a tale of two cities, if you will, in the people analytics space. That's my take. Cole, what's yours?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. I would give a few more kind of nuances around the margins. In the book, I talk heavily about that people analytics, if it wants to be in the camp that you mentioned, like that is actually delivering value, which again, the book prescribes to how to do that effectively, it is discorrelated with external market factors like interest rates rising, M2 monetary policy. I go through and show that there's stark correlations there. And what that means is for the functions that weren't delivering value, there were essentially speculative assets on the balance sheets of organizations that we're just going to, hey, this is a luxury item. We're just going to try it out, see if it works. If we're in an era of zero interest rates, we can speculate and just test out and do some experiments. Hey, is this Moneyball thing really going to deliver for our organization? And the reality is those were the functions that got cut. And what we've seen since then is it's sort of leveled out, which means that people analytics is really, trying to kind of turn a corner in the sense of delivering more value. So whoever kind of made it through the culling, these were the stronger functions, and this is what we can build around. But one of the things that I actively prescribe for in the book is we have to discorrelate ourselves with external market factors. And what that means, if we want to control our destiny as people analytics practitioners, we have to produce value, and it has to be indisputable value, not just in our own eyes, but in the eyes of our customers and in the eyes of finance.
I think that's a really good way to put it. And it seems like it's that's true for all HR functions, right? All people functions, because everybody gets cut. You can't see the value, and so everybody gets cut during downturns in the market, and that shouldn't be. It shouldn't be.
Well, can I touch on that for a second?
Sure.
Because I agree that it's true of all HR functions. I just feel like people analytics is the most equipped of any function that it should have known better. Like, it's a data-driven function. It should have had the data already. Some of these other functions, maybe not as data native as people analytics. And so I feel like people analytics is more culpable than some of the other functions, and therefore should have been an early adopter of these things.
Well, so I'm going to push back there. So in theory, yes, right? Like, they know this, but how many, you've talked to thousands of people analytics leaders over the last few years, so have I. How many of them are like, I know what I should do, but the organization won't invest. HR leaders won't support me. They won't bring me into the high value projects because they're just hoping themselves to get into there. So they're not going to bring along some people analytics leader to do that. So like, how much of this is also a broader system issue that HR has never had good data and they don't trust HR. And so they're not going to bring in the data, HR data people to, tell them how to run their business, no matter how good that individual person or function is or could be.
And the thing I would say is, no matter how good they are at data, because here's a surprising fact that a lot of people have given me this feedback since the book has come out, is like, Cole, I was expecting to find a book with a bunch of formulas and data in it. And you gave me a book about politics and persuasion and faith and utility and all of and generative AI and just trying to persuade leaders that this is important. And because I realized that the thing that you just diagnosed, Stacia, is that people analytics was good at data and bad at persuasion. And so what we really needed to get good at wasn't just improving data quality, which we needed to get better at that too, but we also needed to get better at being a key partner to HR and being a key partner to our business leaders and facilitating that arrangement with HR to the business. And so I feel like I was very prescriptive in the book about how to do that effectively as well, because that has been an ill that has been plaguing even some of the top people analytics teams, to your point.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we wrote a report called People Analytics, the C-Suite Superpower in 2021 that really looked at that relationship between people analytics, the CHRO, and other C-suite leaders. And one of the things that I found to be most powerful there was, one, how in many organizations, the people analytics was dependent on the CHRO and the CHRO's own data capability and understanding. But then also, second, how they could build their own reputation with business leaders if they were able to do it effectively. And honestly, in some ways, remove the CHRO as a blocker, if they were a blocker. And so that sparks a whole debate about where should people analytics sit, yada, yada, yada. But for some of those organizations, basically, they kind of went around the head of HR and got the business leaders so invested in what they did that they pulled people analytics and said to the head of HR, you need to make sure these people are in our meetings, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. I'd love to build on that too. One of the things that I talk about in the book is having business leaders co-underwrite your work. So if you make a $10 million, $50 million, $100 million commitment to the business in conjunction with business leaders, not only does finance no longer need to be a peer of yours, they actually are required to support you because, again, you're putting things into the bottom line that are getting, again, if you're a publicly traded company, back to being reported back to Wall Street. The other part is if they're co-underwriting with you, you have a joint fate with them. And so they are invested in your success just as much as you're invested in their success as a business leader. And CHROs, while finding that simultaneously radical, also love it because they can put it into their own OKRs and KPIs and report it back up to the board as look at the value that not only people analytics is bringing, but HR is bringing. And look how embedded we are with the business and how things operate. And so I think it's a valuable point to make there.
Why do you think, you write in your book that most analytics teams are still scores keepers. They sort of report out on what's happening rather than being very strategic. I'm wondering, why do you think that is? Why does HR in general get stuck counting rather than creating value?
There's two reasons. One is counting things is easy. And so we get stuck doing easy things and as opposed to doing hard, meaningful things for the business. But the other is, I think we mistake the type of questions we receive. So this is an interesting point that I think anytime you tell an analyst this, they're like, oh my God, that describes it perfectly of what I've been going through, which is somebody asks them a question. And it sounds like they're asking for facts. So the question might be, what is happening? And the reality is they're asking 4 questions at once. They're asking, what is happening? Why is it happening? What will happen? And what should I do about it? So that's descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive. But they're asking it as a fact-based question rather than really there's 4 questions being asked all at once. And so analytics approaches the situation as the scorekeepers. They say, hey, we've got the facts. Let's get to a shared set of facts. You asked a what-based question. I'll give you a what-based answer. And the reality is, I skip that. I say, okay, you asked about what? Well, we're going to talk about why. We're going to talk about what to do about it. We're going to talk about what I think is going to happen. And we're going to show you the best possible scenario. We're going to over deliver, right? And people sometimes call this the question behind the question. The reality is a good analyst answers the question that's been asked. A great analyst answers the question behind the question.
This brings up I don't know where Stacia's going to come in as far as this question goes, but this brings up a question for me, what's the role of HR then? If people analytics can do all of these things except define what the question is, then why does HR even need to be in the picture? And does people analytics serve HR or do they serve the organization?
Ooh, asking the hard questions.
Yeah. Well, I want
all right.
Tell me.
So realistically, I think right now, HR needs to continue to exist. However, and this is bringing generative AI into the equation, I think a lot of the things that traditional HR does, and I'm thinking mostly the transactional component, so anything that is repeatable, anything that probably has a technological component to it, is largely going to be subsumed by AI, maybe not in the next year, maybe not even in the next 5 years, but let's say in a 10-year horizon, that is largely going to occur. And much of what we know as traditional HR today will cease to exist. In that case, I make the argument that the people analytics mindset, maybe not the calculations of analytics themselves, because I think generative AI will do that, will be the only kind of mindset that needs to exist into the future. And so then to your second question of who does people analytics serve? Does it serve HR or the business? I've always gone with the mindset that it serves the business first. However, and we probably talk about this in one of your other questions, I always say that a people analytics function needs to pay for itself directly, indirectly, and through people liking and valuing your work. And right now, what you have to do is you have to show that HR likes and values your work. And so you serve them, but ultimately paying for yourself is about serving the business.
Okay, interesting. Because you make a really bold statement in your book. You've publicly said that Dave Ulrich's HR model won't survive this decade. And so you're thinking that there's going to be a massive overhaul of HR. You said a lot of the things that HR does are going to be done by AI in the future.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you stand by that. What does it mean then for us?
Well, first of all, I'd say I'm not even sure Dave Ulrich stands by the Dave Ulrich model anymore because he's written like 5 more operating models since that one came out. I think that that's a fair assessment. I think its simplicity was always the thing that made it as widely adopted as it has because people can understand it. I would say the centers of excellence and shared services part of that have already been collapsing for years. It's kind of hard to distinguish them at many organizations already. And so instead of it being a 3-legged stool, it's become a 2-legged stool or is becoming a 2-legged stool over time. I just see that trend continuing. And what you might see in the future is that there's the human component of HR. And then if we quit using the term AI for everything, just like I feel like, nobody says I have an internet phone. They just say I have a phone. Nobody puts the internet part in there anymore. I think the same thing is going to happen with AI in not too long as people are just going to say it's the human component and the technology component to HR. I think that those are the only 2 things that are left in the future. Fundamentally, that disrupts the Ulrich model. And I don't think that's anything against his. I think the same things that the model accomplishes will still be accomplished. It will just be accomplished through a different operating procedure.
Okay.
Maybe. I mean, we may not even need to do the same things that the Ulrich model.
Yeah. Like how much of the stuff that HR does right now are band-aids for poor systems and processes in operations? Like how much of that doesn't even need to be done if you fix the systems and processes, and how much more quickly can we do it with AI?
Sure. I mean, I think it's like a Peter Drucker quote, which is like, there's no greater waste than doing with great efficiency that which should not be done at all. I'm a big believer in that. So there's plenty of you're not going to get any arguments from me like HR does things that are wildly wrong, right? But I also don't think that this should be like an HR bashing podcast either. I think that there's a lot of things that HR should be doing and it is doing. And what I'm hopeful of is there is no foregone conclusion of what AI is going to disrupt. It is only going to disrupt what we build it to do. Therefore, I think that what we should be building it to do is to deconstructing the transactional parts of HR. Then what that leaves is the strategic and human components that we're debatably good at times and poor at times. And so I think if we want the rising tide to lift all the boats, what we do is we simultaneously invest in the technology and the disruption there, but we also invest in upskilling our people to be more effective at the strategic and human components of HR.
I think Stacia would be on the same page. I think that so you mentioned like the human aspect of HR. We need to be clear on the human aspect of what HR should be doing.
Yeah.
I guess the question that I have right now, and I'm seeing a lot of organizations go too far right now. So how do we decide what those human aspects are that should involve people and those that shouldn't involve people?
And when you say they're going too far to what? From what to where?
Like we're seeing, we're having discussions right now with a couple of organizations that are like, yeah, we're just going to get rid of L&D. We can do that with a good LLM, what they're doing. And it's true. The visible parts of employee development can maybe be done in some organizations by a good LLM. But if you lift out that portion of the organization that is responsible for ensuring that you have a skilled workforce, you're in trouble in 2 years. You know what I mean? And so the data says, well, these tasks can be done by a bot or a machine. Therefore, we should outsource these things to the machine. Where do you draw the line? How do we balance that as we get the humans up to speed to make sure that we understand that they're the strategic things that they're doing? Does that make sense?
First, as an analytic kind of nit, I would say, is there reliability? Because there's multiple calculations to say which tasks will AI disrupt. And is there reliability between those? Because you could be going afoul because one calculation says that AI is going to disrupt this one, but not another calculation. And so I would say I think reliability and validity are still really important. in today's day and age, and we should be bringing data to this equation. But kind of to the broader point, I think I may have mentioned this last time I was on. I can't remember. I have this mental model for people analytics, but I think it applies to all of HR too, which I call the inquisitor and the change agent. If you boil down people analytics to its core essence, it's really a 3-step process. It's asking a good question, it's analyzing the data, understand it, and then it's taking action in the real world to affect change based on that. And what I tell people is, historically speaking, the second step of analyzing data is where we spent 80 to 90% of our time and all of our skill building this is how to do this effectively. And I say, what if, and I don't think it's just a what if, I think this is going to happen, is the second step in that process, AI is going to eat. It's going to eat almost all of it. And so what's left is asking great questions and taking action in the real world. Those, in my mind, are human-based tasks, right? And so what I think a lot of functions are doing right now, frankly, because they're getting pressure from the business to cut costs and just take cost out of the business, I think every business is being asked really tough questions, is they're sort of running like quasi backwards facing experiments instead of saying, hey, let's add in a new condition and see how that affects the rest of the whole. They're saying, what if we subtracted one area and see if the whole can still function? And so let's just get rid of L&D and see what happens. Let's get rid of talent acquisition and see what happens. And although from a scientific standpoint, that could be fascinating, I think it is ill-advised unless, you had that reliable and valid data to go through this. All that to say, I think that AI workforce transformation is what people analytics is going to look like in the future.
Okay.
I think that the people who are going to bring the right data to the equation about not just redeveloping HR and what is the HR operating model look of the future, but redeveloping how work gets done in the business itself. That is a key question of 2026. I hear about it constantly. I'm sure you guys do too, that leading companies were already asking it this year. I think you're going to see a broad introduction of that of all companies starting to ask about it next year or into 2027.
I feel like it's very popular amongst business leaders right now to say we're going to take a first principles approach, right? Which basically is what Dani described. We're going to get rid of everything and see what we actually still need.
Yeah, like zero-based budgeting, but for HR.
Exactly. And so you are saying that's not great. We need to look at it at these different items and understand them. But maybe I'll just ask.
I'm saying it's not great.
Yeah.
Oh, I think what I'm saying is if you're going to do something like that, you should be confident in the data you use to make that decision. I think if you're just
a decision if you just like are cutting everything, right? Like it's not a decision. It's
I worked for a startup 4 years ago that laid off their entire HR function and they just winged it. So like I would say that was, they had to make that decision because their business was floundering at the time. But if you ask the CEO, did they wish they could have done it differently? Absolutely. They wish they could have done it differently.
It just feels like, I don't know, in specializations, the people that do the work know what work needs to be done. And so somebody taking a look from the outside and being like, well, they just do this thing. Let's get rid of it. It seems really, I don't know. It feels like we're sort of at a dangerous point. I'm not a Luddite. I have lots of faith in technology moving forward, but it also feels like we're making decisions based on, I don't even know what we're making it on. The possibility.
Yeah. So can I give like a mental model associated with this? I wrote about it in an article I published last Saturday, which I said that there's like an HR view on the world and then there's a finance view on the world. And in 2022, I say that was the peak ascendancy of the HR view on the world, which is human beings are what delivers the value for an organization. And then that bubble popped. And so as a consequence, not because it's actually a better worldview, it's just because HR is kind of a victim of it got a little ahead of its skis. We have seen the ascendancy of the finance view of the world, which is humans are interchangeable units. If the unit economics of each human in our organization aren't adding up to a number that we like, we're just going to cut until we get to the point. And I think the problem with that worldview is you can't cut your way to growth. Because what I think all of these organizations really are trying to do is they're trying to rediscover growth again in a new complex world. And you could take a first principles look at it. You could take a, zero-based budgeting look at a function. I know some people have been prescribing that from a workforce planning perspective. But fundamentally, I think you have to take a strategy lens before a design lens as to what is going to be the driver of growth for our business And how can we construct, from a design perspective, a business that then delivers that growth that is driven? I'm not sure that that's what the finance worldview is putting forward. I think it's just, are our unit economics looking the way that we want them to look? And if they're not, let's just cut until we get to the way they want them to look.
I agree. But I think your question is spot on, which is then how do you get to the top line number that you want to be at if you've taken out all the
right? Or if you've made
capacity.
the assumption that, or if you've made the assumption that you can get there without the capacity. Like, it feels like I think your view is a good one. We're completely underestimating the importance of the humans in the system.
Yeah. If we were at like some magical level of generative AI where it could do everything like completely reliably better than any human that existed, I think we were having a completely different discussion at that point. And I think the trouble is going on is some leaders are having a discussion about the future of their business as if that were true. But the problem is it's just not true yet. Technology is good, it's not great. And so, again, I think we're doing more experiments with our operating models, just trying to see, hey, if we cut here, if we lop off this limb of the tree, what will the tree look like when it continues to grow? Again, I don't think I'm going to solve this for every business all at once on the Red Thread podcast, but I do think when I've worked with business leaders in the past, what they're really trying to rediscover is how do we create a business operating model that works for us to get back to growth if we're not growing anymore? And I think that's a really broad question at a societal level that many business leaders are trying to grapple with. And we could dig into what are some of the root causes, because I've done some research on what I think is causing some of those things. But I think fundamentally, you got to take it on a case by case basis, on an organization by organization, industry by industry look.
So it seems like even that may be a little optimistic. I mean, it doesn't feel optimistic, but even that seems optimistic compared to.
This is so nice because last time I was on here, you guys like had to preface that I was like being super pessimistic. And so I'm loving that I'm playing the optimist today. I'm really appreciating this.
You can't say we're not mentally flexible, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we've heard, the doomsdayers saying, if we're doing all this, then pretty soon organizations, what's the purpose of an organization? The human organization, there are reasons that the human organization works. There are synergies and all kinds of things associated with that organization. And we're seeing people sort of change it and stuff. But going back to basically Taylorism in this new model and saying all the humans are just cogs and they're interchangeable. And if we figure out a better way to do it, then we're going to replace those humans with cogs. What's the point? Like, it just, I don't know, from an existential point of view, like I get back down to like, what's the point? Not just what's the point of work, but why are we doing this? Because what that basically does is build wealth for the wealthy and cuts.
Well, can I go like there's a step before we get to like, is it extreme capitalism or is it extreme socialism or something like that? So let me go back to the HR worldview versus the finance worldview. I've seen this fascination, especially in the startup world, which is how soon are we going to get to $1 billion company that has one employee? That is, again, what I would call peak finance worldview. If peak HR worldview is 2022 or 2021, peak finance is we are so ultimately fascinated that what if we employed almost no one, but we made pure money? The counter view to that is, does work only serve to make money, or does work serve to give people the ability to, express their human creativity through the process of work? I think there's kind of this apocryphal example of Henry Ford when he was trying to create vehicles for the first time. He said, they could have charged more for them, but they wanted to make them charge less so that their own workers could afford to buy the vehicles that were being produced, i.e. that work served the purpose of society, not just the shareholder interest. And I think what we're going to be grappling with over the next few years when people start to be, I think we're already starting to see this, but I think it's going to come to bear much more over time, that finance worldview is also going to pop at some point, and people are going to like that a little bit less, just like the HR worldview happened in 2022. And so I really just think that we're going to have to grapple with what happens after that pops. And I think the reality is it's going to have to be some sort of balance. It's going to be a balance between shareholder interest and the fact that people want and need and value the work that they do for organizations. And maybe, just maybe, that there are value that human beings bring beyond just technology. Is that too Pollyanna-ish?
I don't think it is, but I do think like, yes, we're gonna swing back. My question is it gonna be too late for a lot of, I feel super pessimistic. I don't even want to say that on this podcast. Like, but it feels like friend to friend. It feels very, I don't know. We've seen the build up to this, right? Like,
do you want me to hit you with some data? Just because like we actually researched this stuff in my day job. And so like one of the things that we found is, like if you look in job descriptions for AI and AI skills related to the roles, the positions that have the highest level, and this is going to surprise no one, the highest level of AI adoption already as of this moment are IT and computer science. Now, what percentage of job descriptions in that space do you think have AI as a skill that they're trying to hire for? Just guess, somewhere between 1 and 100.
98.
98. You know what the real number is? It's 16%.
Really?
16% of job descriptions for IT and computer science have AI as a description right now. And so we wrote
because it's like, is that a foregone conclusion that you are already, is it the water we're swimming in sort of thing? No,
okay. Not at all. What I'm saying is the water you're swimming in is not representative of the entire economy. Right? Now, in a very narrow subset, the water you're swimming in is probably 98% of job postings. Right? But for the broad economy, it's 16%. And remember, that's the high watermark. It only goes down from there for other occupations. Most are hanging around, I think HR, if I'm remembering correctly, was either 3 or 4%. And so what I'm saying is these trends are coming. They're absolutely coming. We're early on an exponential curve. And anybody who knows an exponential curve knows that things can rapidly change. And I'm a big believer that I think they will rapidly change somewhere in the next 5 to 10 years. But all that said, we are not as far along that if we're like AGI does not exist, it is not in 98% of jobs. AI is not disrupting them. I can't think of a single person at my company and probably nobody at your company that you've already fully replaced with AI yet. These are not things that have happened yet. They could happen.
Okay. Well, that makes me feel happy. Let's get back to people analytics.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to change. Let me restart that. That's a good opportunity for us to move on to lightning round.
Yeah.
So let's do that. Let's get to know a little bit more about you, Cole. This first question, I think, actually is a pretty good one for you, which is, what job would you be terrible at?
Almost all of them. You could argue my current job. I would say any role where I have to like take top-down direction, I probably struggle with. So let's say the Army, because I think that's pretty hierarchical. So I would really, really struggle there.
Okay, well, given that answer, I think I know the answer to number 2, but we'll ask it anyway. Would you rather fly or control time? I
would definitely try to control time. I think that would be so interesting. Just that, like, even if you told me, like, Cole, you can't go back and change anything, or, if I could just pause time sometimes, that would be just for my own sanity, would be great.
All right. What's your DJ name?
People used to call this was a thing back in the day. Remember Napster? It would probably be like DJ Napster, I suspect, just because that was a thing back then.
Napster.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
Okay. So let's get back into some of our questions about the book. So in the book, you wrote, if your analytics can't be tied to revenue, cost, or risk reduction, it's a hobby.
Yeah.
Blunt, very blunt. So let's talk about what that actually looks like. So do you have any examples of where you've seen analytics pay for itself?
Well, first, I'd like to say, I actually don't think that's a blunt message at all. I think the fact that it feels blunt to many people is because nobody actually told them that was what was necessary. And to me, I feel like that's a shame on the whole field. And so if you're the first person who tells, an adolescent that, hey, it's time to grow up, I think that's the message I was trying to provide, is like, hey, we're an adolescent field. It's time to grow up. And so in terms of paying for yourself, again, most of the work I've done in my career was under non-disclosure agreements. And so I'll just use kind of a vague example that most organizations can think of. So earlier in the podcast, I talked about people, if you're a people analytics team, you either pay for yourself directly, indirectly, or through people liking and valuing your work. A typical example of that I've done at many organizations and most people analytics teams have done in one capacity or another, is working with sales teams. Now, a lot of folks would do something along the lines of, from a risk mitigation standpoint, what if we reduce sales turnover? What would that do to our ability to make more money? That's a great start. And that would be an example of paying for yourself directly. But I would also encourage businesses and people analytics teams at those businesses, what if you tried to help sales teams actually sell more effectively? That's another really great example. And then an example of indirectly paying for yourself is, what if you improve sales leadership? Wouldn't that help these sales teams be more effective at the same time? So again, done that at multiple organizations. And then if the HR teams and the business teams like that you've done that work and feel like it was a worthwhile investment, liking and valuing your work cannot be underestimated. Going back to the points around political persuasion, influence, decision-making, and embedding yourself with the business, these are all key components about how to do this effectively. And again, I know those were somewhat vague, but I think any people analytics practitioner would tell you, oh yeah, we've talked about doing that before. And so those would be some use cases that you could use.
Yeah, we had quite a few examples like that in that report I mentioned, that C-suite superpower. I think one of the ones that jumped out at me the most was a tech organization. This was obviously at a different place in the market or time in the market, but basically they were handing out these huge bonuses to software engineers coming out of top tier schools. And this analytics leader asked, do these actually drive any sort of retention? One, are these people noticeably better? And two, does it drive retention? And he found that neither of those were true. And they cut it and they saved $500 million.
Oh my God.
over the 2 or 3 years since they had run the projects. So, yeah.
Well, I love that example. And, I want to build on it too, because one of the things, I don't want to be myopically focused and just say, the only thing that matters is dollars and cents. You might as well just be a finance function if that's all that matters at a business. And so the reality of the equation too, I always think about things through sort of like the social science lens too, at the same time as the kind of the finance view in the world, which is, what signals were they sending to not just the software engineers that work there, but also to the external marketplace as an indication? So a more recent example I've been using about this is, because again, we've done research into like AI engineers, what's the going rate, how much do you need to pay them? And then you see what's been going on with AI engineers making $100 million offers. And I think from a business dollars and cents standpoint, those investments cannot be justified. But what was happening there is actually a signaling mechanism to the market that we are a business that can afford $100 million offers. You're not going to beat us. And so I think sometimes we confuse that everything is just dollars and cents. And sometimes it's about competitive dynamics and signaling theory in the marketplace. And so again, I just encourage anybody who's in HR to take a very broad lens to how they view the world of business and why there might be multiple causes for why something is happening.
Yeah, I think that's good advice.
And we're talking a lot about the importance of people analytics and how it can help you make better decisions, but we're also sort of about the premise of a brand new precipice of a brand new era. So I'm super curious about the types of metrics you would recommend people track in this AI-driven world.
Yeah. This may sound kind of absurd, but I actually don't even really believe that much in metrics. One of the things I used to do when I was a people analytics leader is when I would go around and meet with teams is I would have a slide in my slide deck that just defined words and terms so that we could all have a shared set. And so I always had, what is a report? What is a dashboard? What is a metric? And what is people analytics? And those are 4 different things. And so I put metrics into that kind of fact-based camp of answering what questions from earlier, right? And so getting to a shared set of facts and a shared set of definitions is very important. But it is the starting point, not the ending point. Many people analytics teams only traffic in the currency of facts. And the reality is, people analytics is fundamentally about taking facts, making projections, and making change in the real world. And so I've been asked multiple times, I'm sure you guys have too, what are your top 10 favorite metrics? And I always say that that's an unanswerable question. And it's why I replace it as like, what are your top favorite facts? And it's like, well, maybe, I don't know, T-Rex is the best dinosaur. Is that super helpful? I don't know. And that's not even a fact. That's actually an opinion, right? So that was actually a bad example, but I don't care. The reality of the situation is, though, like I am only looking for what can make changes in the real world. Is that driven through data and facts and predictions and equations? And the role that AI is going to play, it's just going to be better at understanding and getting to ground truth on those facts more quickly. But what that's going to do is it's going to put more onus on the prescriptive part of analytics, which is what should we do about it? And frankly, it's pretty good at making recommendations. But and I know you guys have looked into this greatly, is it a human in the loop or is there no human in the loop when it comes to decision making? I'm very much in the camp that a human being should always be in the loop. And it goes back to, there's this famous IBM slide from the 1970s that's been kind of circulating. And it was when the advent of computers was happening. And it said, computers cannot make decisions because computers cannot be held accountable. And as long as AI cannot be held accountable to its decisions, I think, frankly, from an HR perspective, it's going to be on very shaky ground from a legal defensibility standpoint. But also, I just think that human beings can only make decisions because human beings can be held accountable. And as of this moment, AI is not a conscious entity and cannot be held accountable.
Okay. So what I heard from that is you don't have any favorite metrics for AI. And
I don't. No. And I think the premise of the question is absurd.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk data infrastructure. I think you called it the least sexy but most essential lever. And I don't know why you're going around calling something sexy unsexy, but
No.
whatever.
This is my favorite description of the book because it's so true. The super unsexy parts of what we do are now going to become super sexy and fun and interesting and impactful.
Mm-hmm.
I have to admit, I was
the problem
dreading...
is you thought that it was unsexy in the first place. I mean, come on.
Yeah. I mean, I'm willing to admit I'm part of the problem. That was the chapter in the book I was dreading writing the most because anybody who knows me knows I just want to have good data and go take action with it. I don't want to spend 3 years cleaning up data infrastructure and putting it in place. The weird thing is that was my favorite chapter to write. And it's because I think, how does the expression go? It's something like sometimes nothing happens for a decade and sometimes decades happen in days. And I think that's what's going on with data infrastructure right now. Is I just feel like for like the last decade before generative AI was on the equation, data infrastructure was so boring, so pedantic. It was just a thorn in your side, but you had to do it. You had to eat your vegetables, right? If you want to lose weight, you got to eat your vegetables. And the reality is AI has made data infrastructure so interesting. And therefore, that was one of the most interesting parts of the book. But it's also simultaneously, we always knew data infrastructure was the most important part about doing people analytics at scale. You can't scale your people analytics until you get your infrastructure right. But that problem is an order of magnitude more important on AI steroids, right? Because AI is going to be able to do things at scale that we previously thought were not possible. And it's only going to be possible if you get your data infrastructure AI ready. And I think many of the vendors in the space that are the kind of like what I call the platform vendors are trying to solve this equation for organizations. I think they've been trying to solve it for organizations for over a decade. And I think that they're probably going to continue to run into the same problems because getting your data infrastructure right is hard and it takes acts of volition to make happen. And I think now is the time to make those investments. If you're wanting to see AI transformation next year or the year after, you have to be making those investments now.
How does that end up sitting then with these organizations that are, as we said a while ago now, pushing for efficiencies, pushing for being able to show that you've achieved whatever ROI from these projects, right? I mean, it's like when you build a house, like it's never that much fun to put in the plumbing, but like if you try to run the toilet without the plumbing and later it's a real problem. How are you seeing organizations kind of meshing these two together, high pressure from the top to perform with AI, but terrible infrastructure that they're going to have to spend a few years fixing?
Sure. I think, and since I was being accused of being too optimistic earlier, I'll be pessimistic here for a second. I think most organizations are going to fail. I think when you see a phase shift technology, there are a few if you look historically at this, anytime there's a phase shift technology, most of the current incumbents don't make it out the other side. And new organizations come along and replace them. I think that that trend is very likely to happen again. And so, yeah, organizations, feel free. Don't make the investments. You're going to fail. And the companies that do, that are AI native, that start up, they're going to be your successors. And these are very foreseeable things. And so we can say, well, it's too hard, or we don't want to make the investment. It's like, fine. It's your choice to whether you live or die. That's fine.
But do you think that even the incumbents that are in place right now can catch up with an AI native? Like, I just think of like banking, for example, right? Like somebody spins up a bank today with VC money and they're doing it completely differently and they don't have any of the baggage that a 100-year-old bank has. And they're able to do it faster and cheaper and with fewer resources and blah, blah, blah. While, our big banks are trying to retrofit all of these things into what they have. Is it even possible, or should we just expect a turnover?
I think that there's a reason why there's many organizations that have existed for over 100 years. And it's because they were comfortable with reinventing themselves, but also largely because, and again, this gets completely out of the realm of HR and people analytics, but into the realm of business. I mean, I feel like this is turning into like an MBA course, which is fine. I love this. It's fun. But you're getting into the realm of, do you have a institutional moat for your organization? Do you have things that doesn't matter if technology comes along and disrupts you? Are you still going to be successful? Those businesses will likely persist. However, the second tier, the third tier businesses in that same industry, they're plumb for the picking, right? And, one man's market share looks like another man's meal sometimes. And so again, if you're not an innovator in this space, or you don't have some kind of institutional advantage, you're probably going to struggle.
Well, we're fine with it turning into an MBA conversation, given that we're both MBAs.
Well, I'm not. So there you go.
So we talked about how AI can potentially significantly disrupt organizations. How do you think it's going to disrupt HR itself? Like, we've talked about people analytics, but HR itself.
I think that, again, it depends on the time frame that you're looking at. I would say I've been looking at this like a decision tree. And so if you look 10 years into the future, there's really 3 branches on the tree. I would say nothing really changes in HR, which is entirely possible, but I don't think the most likely branch. I think that there is a AI medium branch and an AI high branch. I'd say the least likely branch is the AI high branch. And what I mean by that is, like, we get to AGI, jobs don't exist anymore. And, like, human beings are all like living off UBI or whatever is going on. And at that time, right? Maybe we've all killed each other by that point. But the reality is, I think that's the least likely branch. The most likely branch is what I call AI medium, where AI is pretty good, maybe a little bit better than it is today, but it has become faster, cheaper, and more reliable, right? So it may not be superhuman, but it's faster, cheaper, and more reliable. As that innovation curve starts to go down, that means the barriers to adoption of AI start to be removed. As each of those barriers starts to get removed, parts of HR that were done, historically speaking, again, going back to that Ulrich model, that historically a human being had to do, not necessarily that they wanted to do, but they had to do, will start to be layered in with new forms of technology and AI. And I think that's the most likely branch. And so the reality is, what HR looks 10 years into the future, in my opinion, is most likely either it's going to look just the same and we're going to be having the same problems we always had, or we're going to start deconstructing ourselves and reconstructing ourselves around cheaper, more reliable AI than exists today.
But that's realigning ourselves around a tool, not necessarily around a problem.
I mean, have the problems of HR really changed in the last 100 years? I actually think that the problems stay fairly consistent. It's how you address them that changes.
I also think that's an interesting point of view. And I might be wrong, but the way that I'm seeing AI is it's going to become the water that we swim in. So we're not even going to align around a tool. We're going to align around being able to do different things than we're currently doing, and using different technology that has that stuff built in that allows us to do different things.
Yeah, I think I probably align more with that, because I think ultimately it's a tool to get things done. The question is, are the things different, or to what extent are they different? And to what extent who needs to do those jobs?
Yeah. I think what we're having is debate over whether or not AI is a paradigm shift or not. And so I think about like the assembly line as a paradigm shift for a cobbler who was making shoes or something, or, somebody who was making widgets beforehand. And I think we're debating, really, does the assembly line really replace the humans or not? And it's like, yeah, humans have a role in the assembly line. At least they did historically before automation came in. But the nature of the work of a cobbler completely changed. And I think I see AI has a potential to be a paradigmatic, a word I've never said out loud before, but only read, a paradigmatic shift. And I think you guys are saying that maybe it's just more an incremental shift, and that could be a change in perspective. And I'm fine being wrong about that.
I'm not sure that actually articulates what I'm saying. I think you are maybe pointing out the debate, but I think it will be a paradigm shift. But I think I'm aligned with Dani in that.
Like, ask chess players, do they think that AI is better than them? They'll laugh at you. They know that AI is better than every chess player that exists in the world right now, right? And they've come to terms with that, and they just realize, hey, we just like playing other humans, right? And maybe we study the AI to get better from a strategy standpoint and become more discorrelated with what a human being would normally do in a certain situation to try to get an edge from a strategy standpoint. But fundamentally, the game of chess went through a paradigmatic change, and it's no longer what it once was. You don't study the old games from 1920s of a famous grandmaster. Maybe you can as a hobby. Right now, people study AI. And I think the same thing is going to happen in the place of work as AI progressively gets better. It might not get better. It might not get cheaper. It might not get faster. It may be this giant bubble. I might be completely wrong, and the first branch of the tree is correct. But if it truly does the things that, the analogy from chess applies to HR, I think what I'm saying is true.
No, I agree. I think it's a paradigm shift too, but I don't think it's a paradigm shift that aligns around AI as a thing. I think it's a paradigm shift that aligns around all these things that we can do now that we couldn't do before, or all these things that we can do better that we were already doing. And so it becomes less about AI as a thing and much more about how everything changes because of the thing.
Maybe we're saying the same thing from two different ways. Because when you just described it there, I was like, yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, I think we probably are. Cole, thank you for being with us and for going completely off script. This was a really, really fun conversation. We want to end with two questions. The first one is, if you could change one thing about how executives view HR today, what would it be?
I think I would change it all. One of the things I meant to say earlier, I forgot to say it, is you guys would, maybe you wouldn't be surprised, but most people would be surprised how many times I've been told in my career, wow, are you sure you're in HR? To me, that was a high compliment. To the HR function, it was not a compliment. And so I think in most business executives' eyes, and maybe this is, again, to the point from earlier about being blunt, but again, if you're trying to tell an adolescent how to grow up and be an adult, the blunt message is most business leaders don't really like what HR is doing today, and we need to be better. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think as HR people, again, I'm kind of trying to get out of the mind of chiding the field. I just want to help them get better. And so hopefully this conversation, and I know you guys do really great work in this space as well, helps equip not just the top 1% of HR people to be better, but the 100% of HR people. And so I think that's really the message for folks is, it's not that we're bad and we need to take that to our core. It's that we have the opportunity to improve, and we're helping equip you with the skills to get there.
We'll wrap the podcast with the final question that we ask. And I know we asked it of you a year ago, but maybe it's different, which is, Cole, why do you do the work that you do?
Well, I do different work now than I used to do. And so I would say, most of my career I'd done as a subset of people analytics, a lot of work around things like employee listening and really trying to hear what experience employees are having. How do they feel? How does that drive business outcomes? I'm kind of tired of it. So I've moved more into kind of the labor economics space, where you get to learn about how the labor market influences organizations, but also the broader economy. And I don't have to hear about people's feelings quite as much. And so, because I've just kind of, you've heard about it for 15 years, maybe your 16th year, you want to hear something else. And so that's kind of why do I do what I do? I like dealing with human beings, but I want to look at them from a different vantage point from now on.
Arm's length vantage point.
Yeah.
Well, Cole, thank you so much for being on Workplace Stories.
Thanks for having me, Stacia and Dani. You guys are some of my favorites. I am so honored to be invited back. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Okay, that's a wrap for this episode of Workplace Stories. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast so that you can be the first to know about future episodes. For exclusive access to our research, insights, and a vibrant network of human capital leaders, consider joining the Red Thread research community. Visit redthreadresearch.com to learn more and to take your workplace to the next level.